Okay, my earliest childhood memory is when I was 2 years old. 2.5 years old. You won't believe this. We lived across from Liberty Park, and me and a little boyfriend went across 9th South holding hands. Some guy offered us candy, and we went with him in his car, and my mom couldn't find me. She left Bobby, my little brother, in the tub, left him there looking for us. When they found us at Liberty Park, we had candy, and we were strolling up and down the outside there of Liberty Park, hand in hand. We just were having a ball.
With this guy or alone?
He'd gone. He just...
Well, wait a minute.
The older guy. Yeah, that's right. And so that was my first experience with boys. And I feel like I can remember it, but I probably heard my mother tell it over and over again till I thought I remembered it, but I swear I can remember it.
Spilling the paint. You don't think your mom...
Oh, well, that was when I was about 18 months old.
What happened?
And my mother had some paint on under the cupboard or somewhere, or outside of the cupboard, and she went in the other room, and I tipped over the can of paint and was splashing in it when she came out, and she kicked me clear across the room. And she cried all day because she did that.
Oh, good.
See, I don't remember it, but she's told me that so many times. My father was transferred all the time. He was a meat cutter at Safeways, and so he was transferred a lot. So, for instance, in the 2nd grade, I was in Greeley, Colorado, Wyoming, Provo, and Salt Lake.
That was just in one...
Yeah.
1 year that you went to how many?
4 schools.
In 1 year?
In 1 year. One school term.
By the time you came back here...
But I thrived on it.
How?
I just loved school. So, in fact, Carol Morrison and I went to the 3rd grade together. We found out, had the same teacher, Miss Alt. It was Hamilton School up here in Salt Lake. And I remember the twins, and I remember one of them fainted every time she got up to read.
Was it Carolyn?
And no, it was Carol's sister, Marilyn. And we decided and we were the only ones that would march with little colored girls. Her name was Pauline, and Carol and I were the only ones that would march with her.
Really?
Yeah, that's a true story. You can ask Carol. And then when I was in the 4th grade, we settled in Provo, and I went to the Mazer School. In Wyoming, I tap danced on the radio. They didn't have TV. My mother had me take tap dancing lessons from the time I was 5. And I tap danced at the Wards, but in Wyoming they had me tap dance on the radio. You never knew these stories, did you?
No, that's why I'm doing this.
Okay.
What?
Well, I was probably maybe Christian's age, 9 or 10.
Tap dance on the radio.
Tap danced on the radio. I started taking tap dancing when I was 5 years old.
For how long?
And well, for a long time, you know, and I told you about that, dancing all over the place and at Wards. And when I was 12 is the last time I danced, because they clapped. I danced to Turkey in the Straw, and they clapped me back, and Mother made me go out with my beard and my coveralls and stuff, and I danced like this, and I said, I'm never going to do that again. So I never did. Because I was embarrassed, because she made me do a different dance than, you know, it was okay for Turkey in the Straw to have that garb on, but I was embarrassed when I had to go out and, you know.
Well, that's silly.
Yeah.
You said the boys used to follow you around?
Oh, they did. They'd follow me home from school. When I started at the Mazer, there was one little boyfriend, his name was Perry Fuller. And we would, at recess, we would hold hands and walk around the school, and by the time we got around the school, the whole school would be following us. And you know, after I married Wilbur, well, Perry Fuller came, he's a cousin of Rodine's, and he came here to visit her. She called me and said, Perry's here and he wants to come and see you. Here he was a bishop at the time, and I was married to Wilbur. And you know what, when I was with Charlie, he never did get over me, because when I was with Charlie, he came to visit me at our little apartment on Center Street, and he visited with me, and he says, "Can I just kiss you just once?" And I said, "No." You're really a cute kid. But when he came to visit me, he had gotten really chubby, and but Rodine said he just could not get. He's always just wanted to,
Why do the kids follow you around?
They loved me, and when we played kickball, I'm the one they wanted on their team, because I was the best cook. I was the best kicker in the school, and I played softball. I was the best pitch and third baseman that you ever saw.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was. Oh, at grade school, I played marbles with the boys all the time. You draw a circle.
For a girl at the time?
Well, I don't know. I didn't care. The boys would fight over me, Michael.
I believe it.
And even up to junior high, and then I had to move to Salt Lake, and leave the Farrer Junior High, and I was shattered, and came back and wanted to go back to Farrer Junior High, and had to go to the Dixon Junior High, and I would hardly talk to anybody.
Why?
My whole personality changed. I just, in fact, I don't know, that ruined my life.
What ruined your life?
Going to the Dixon Junior High on the west side. Carl Nuttall and this Sidney Hedman got up in a tree because I didn't invite them to my party, and threw eggs at my house. Well, in junior high, they had what we call the posture parade. You had to weigh a certain amount, be built a certain way. We'd go up to the where was the football stadium then? And we'd march and get rated on how good we were in that. I was in that kind of thing.
How'd you get graded?
Really good. There was a lot of us, and it was all girls. It was an all-girl thing. I sang. I mean, they didn't have madrigals or anything like that. And I remember one time they asked me to sing in a quartet. My teacher thought I had a really good voice, but I was so scared. I went and did it, but I was petrified, and I just never wanted to do it again. So Mother wanted me to take piano lessons. I did. I've left out a lot of things. When I was younger, I had was in drama. It was called elocution. Elocution. And Mother had me I took lessons in that, and I was in all kinds of plays when I was in grade school. Yeah, and I was really good, because I remember in one play I was the king, and I had to go, "Open the door, I am the king." And I had a little girl come up to me afterwards and say, "Are you always that ornery?" And I was pretty good. Yeah, and I tap danced a lot, and stuff. He was 2.5 years younger than I was. And I remember we both wanted a bugle. And he called me Sissy. He'd always say, "Let Sissy have it." And you know how sometimes, I still to this day remember, he was about 5 and I was about 8. And he'd get on one end of the couch and I'd get on the other, and we'd get in bare feet and see who could push the hardest with our, And I don't know, he just was so, he was just, he hated fighting. He'd go out of his way to keep from, and he got spinal meningitis. There was the Aird Hospital up on the corner from where we live. I remember they took him to the hospital because he had 170-degree temperature, and he died within a week. And in those days they brought the casket in the house, left it overnight. And I remember my grandpa was sleeping in there on the couch with him, and I could hear him talking in his sleep or something. It haunted me, and for a long time I had to look everywhere. I thought Bobby was under my bed.
Scaring you?
Oh, it scared me to death.
You heard Bobby talking in his sleep?
I thought Grandpa was talking to Bobby, because the casket was in the house. That's the way they used to do it.
And talk about how that affected your mom and then your dad.
My mom would not let any radio be turned on for a year, and finally one day my dad said to my mother, "You're not the only one that's suffering." And Mother said that just brought her out of it, because Mother was kind of self-centered, you know. She thought she was the only one that was hurting, I guess.
So no radio, nothing levity, nothing.
No, she was just, that was a hard year.
And you were 11.
I was 11 when he died.
How's that for you, Mom? I mean, an 11-year-old kid.
Well, I'm not sure. You know, you don't, when you're 11 years old, I can't remember how I felt. You know, it just doesn't hit you like it would an older person, you know. I remember a teacher saying to me, Marilyn, I'm so sorry about your brother. And I said, oh, that's okay. I always remember saying that and thinking, I'll bet she thinks I don't care. You know? I can't explain the relationship with my mother. I loved her. I thought she knew everything. You know Sister Harrington that just died? Well, she was my 7th grade teacher. One day in class, she taught cooking. And she said, I want one of you to come up and show me how to set a table. Well, I thought my mom knew exactly how to set a table. I raised my hand and I go up and I put everything right in the middle. And she said, Marilyn, that's not the way you set a table. It shattered me. I said, well, that's the way my mother does it, you know. My grandma and grandpa lived in Junction. That's another awfully good time in my life when I was younger. There were no roads or anything. Junction is just a little one service station then and a candy store, and we'd go there a lot, you know, and I rode horses up and down the streets, and when I was 5 and I'd go there, they'd give me candy to tap dance in the candy store. And I can just see the lady there. She was kind of heavy, and she'd just give me candy if I'd tap dance. So I would get out and tap dance. I played the bugle when I was in the 6th grade. I was in the drum and bugle corps. And we would go up the canyon with the Mutual. I was in the first year of the Mutual. And they asked me to play taps every night. And so I would play taps every night. We were there a week. And they came to me one night and said, Marilyn, we understand you play the bugle. And I said, yeah. And they said, would you mind playing taps every night? And so I played taps every night up there.
How old?
12. Yeah. Maybe 13, but I was in the drum and bugle corps. We played kick the can. When I was in the 6th grade, we would all get up on the corner and play hide and seek, kick the can, run sheepy run. Just had a ball, because we didn't have TV to watch or anything, you know. We just had so much fun.
And it wasn't worrisome to be out at night.
No, you didn't have to worry about anything like that. Except I had a boyfriend named Daryl Jensen in the 6th grade, and one time we were playing hide and seek, and in those days my dad caught he and I kissing and told Daryl Jensen, don't you ever come to my place again.
What's the earliest you ever kissed a boy?
Oh my gosh, early.
And you just kept on going?
Just kept right on going. And then, you know, at those times, you know, we had dances in the 6th grade, and we wouldn't have dates, but we'd all go in a bunch, and we had dance cards, Michael. And I'd walk in the door and I'd have my dance card filled up. You didn't have dates, but you'd have so many dances. And I remember when I was in the 7th grade, before we moved to Salt Lake, there was an 8th grader named Walter that had a crush on me, and he would just wait. And he'd come to the dances, the 6th grade dances, just so that he could dance with me. I was a good dancer at the time, you know.
What kind of dances would you do?
Oh, not the kind you do now. You know, it's the foxtrot and the waltzes and we had in the 6th grade we had 1 hour of teaching us how to dance, and then from 6 to 8, maybe once or twice a month, we'd have these dances, and this Byron, what was his name? Byron Jensen would play the piano for our dances. And
you would dance to a piano?
Yeah. Well, you know, we were only in the 6th grade, but we had a ball. We had parties all the time, and we'd play post office and wink, where the boy is standing back of the girl, and then you'd wink, and you'd try to get over. If you didn't get over to the other place quick enough, you'd get to kiss, the guy'd get to kiss you. You know, it was just so much fun. It was clean. It was just so nobody ever thought of doing anything wrong, you know? I loved it. I just, looking back on it, you're making me think, you know, it was just a great time. They had, on the 4th of July, we lived just a block off Center Street. So on the 4th of July, did I tell you this before? We'd walk up to Center Street. My friends would all congregate. We had a big porch like that up there, and my friends from high school and from wherever, we'd all congregate and walk up to there. Then we'd come back, and Mother'd have a big meal. Mother was really great. My friends were all in love with my mother, Michael. They just loved her to pieces. She was so, and my dad, you know. And then they had a big, at the other end of the street, by the courthouse, they had the Ferris wheel and merry-go-round, and right in the middle of the street. I mean, it was so much fun.
Center?
Right on Center Street. Charlie said, will you go steady with me? He was 3 years older than me. And he was my neighbor, and and his sister was my best friend. And when I moved there, he started flirting with me, and he really, you're fascinated with a little bit older. And that was after we moved back from Salt Lake, and I had to go to the Dixon Junior High, and I wasn't happy going there anyway, or I may have never even, but he was fun, he was good looking. Well, he looked a lot like Brandon. He was really, really a cute guy, And the first time I ever saw him, I was playing games with Kent Dastrup and his brother, and Charlie climbed up the side of the house, and I remember seeing his face peeking in the window, kitchen window.
You said you used to sit on the front lawn with Charlie and kiss.
I did.
When you were how old?
14. And we really kissed, that's all. But we'd take a blanket out, and my mother and dad never said a word. Not a word.
So you would...
That's all, just kiss and kiss and kiss.
Did you kiss lots of other boys?
I loved it.
Did you kiss a lot of other boys?
Well, when I told you I started going with Mike Skierman, I remember we necked one night so hard that I had a cold sore the next morning. But he never tried anything. They never, you know what, I never had a boy get fresh with me. And when I graduated from high school, we graduated in the Tabernacle in Provo. We didn't have gowns then. We dressed, and it was my first pair of high heels. And I walked up, and when I left the row I was on, I said, it'll be just like me to fall. And when I got up, took my diploma, Mother said I looked and smiled so cute, walked across, caught my heel on the top step, fell to the bottom. And I looked down, and the kids, I thought, they hate me. I've ruined this whole... That was a horrible experience. But when I got back to the row, everybody was laughing so hard that then I felt better about it, Everybody just pulled together during World War II. I mean, I worked at Woolworths, and I sold stamps. I worked at the ration board when the sailors and all of them came. Gas was rationed. Everything was rationed. You could only have a certain amount of... If the president tried to do that now, everybody would just go bananas. But everybody just pulled together, and the feeling was just one of closeness. And all of the big stars would come. You know where the courthouse is? The Sitting County building in Provo? Well, they'd set the stars would, like Abbott and Costello, and some of the big stars would come and put on shows to sell bonds. Well, would you think they'd do that now?
You mean in Provo they
In
come?
Provo, yes. I mean, it was a you shouldn't say it's a good time, but it was. Everybody just really pulled together.
And I imagine you had friends that went off and never came back?
Exactly. A lot of friends that went off and never came back that I had gone to school with, and...
Was it a scary thing? I mean, was there right now America feels like it's the big tough guy that could never be defeated, but back then did you feel like there was a chance you could...
President Roosevelt was we didn't think we'd be defeated, although so many were killed, but nobody criticized President Roosevelt that I knew about. I mean, they were just totally behind. They didn't have these stupid idiots that they've got now,
Like the anti-war people?
Yeah, they didn't have protests that I knew of. Maybe they did, but I just didn't The thing he did that really is not good was taking all of the American Japanese and putting them in. I don't like that. At the time, I didn't think about it, but we weren't even allowed to speak to anybody that was Japanese or German or.
Weren't allowed?
No, we weren't supposed to.
In America?
In America.
They tell you not to do something?
Well, because the Nazis and the Japanese were our enemy. You know, I went to Brigham a lot. Spent the summers with Jackie, and she worked in a cannery there, and so I'd go with her. And there was this Japanese fellow that was working there. We weren't allowed. We were not supposed to even talk to him. We did, but you know, President Roosevelt was president for 3 terms.
FDR?
Yeah.
So when you were born, that was who was president, probably?
Oh, I don't think when I was born.
But most of your life. I mean,
But the only president I remember was President Roosevelt. And then Truman, when President Roosevelt died, Truman took his, and I hated Truman, so that's when I switched from Democrat to Republican. And my dad was a strict Republican, and he hated President Roosevelt, and we'd fight about it. The only time he got mad at me is when I said I like President Roosevelt, and he said, "You don't know a damn thing about it." I cried all day the day President Roosevelt died. I was a junior, I guess I was a senior in high school. I mean, everybody loved him. Oh, he was wonderful, you know, I mean.
Always the top of your class, you said.
I really was, you know. In fact, my senior year, I only had to work half a day because Mr. Sumner, who had a credit bureau, sent over to our shorthand class to Mrs. Spencer and wanted her very best student to work for him half a day, and I'd get my credit. She sent me. I was the fastest in the class. And I loved that job. That was when I was a senior, and I got to cut out classes that I absolutely hated. Like, what was the name of that class? It was something to do with science and something to do with, I just hated it. I was so excited and to think she picked me out of all of her shorthand students. I was really fast in shorthand at the time. I don't know if I wouldn't be now, but, you know, they don't even use shorthand anymore. But. And Mrs. Spencer was a very, very hard teacher, and if she didn't like you, you knew it, you know. So I was quite proud of that. And then the lawyer that was right next to him tried to get me to come and work for him. In fact, when he needed me, he borrowed me sometimes, and I took briefs down in shorthand. You know, lawyers, he was a lawyer. His name was Worthington. And
what a memory.
I was very good. I was very good. Okay, then this little house in the middle there was for sale for $9,500, and I was working at the State Bank of Provo at this time. And I got a loan. They wanted $500 down, $76 a month, and I was in the loan office. You know, I was a loan officer, and so it was very easy to get that loan, and so I was living in, and my first car. So the first thing I did when I bought that house was I bought this little 1950 Ford Coupe for $75, and it was a stick shift, and I had never driven a stick shift. And I drove around the block and around the block, you know, squirt, 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 you know, how you learn. And finally I got so, we had more fun in that little coupe. You know, but now, how I got to Salt Lake. Jackie, my cousin, was here, and I really, you know, wanted to, she kept wanting me to move up here. And so I said to my mother one day, Mother, I'm going to go to Salt Lake, and if I can get a job, I'm going to move to Salt Lake. And she said, you are not going to take those 3 little kids to Salt Lake, just you and the 3 kids. And I said, if I get a job, I'm moving. So Beulah Barney and I, you know Beulah, she came with me, and we went up to the gas company, Mountain Fuel Supply. Took me a half an hour. They gave me a test in shorthand and stuff. The secretary to the treasurer of the company, he hired me just like that. So but you know, it just pulled on me to be here. It wasn't because of Jackie, it was because of Wilbur, because at that same time, his wife was dying. You know where the theater is on Center Street and right across from the City and County building.
Yeah.
Well,
Still there?
I only lived a block. I don't know if it is or not, but I lived a block away from it, and it was 10 cents. And you'd go and you'd see the same movie over and over and over again. You didn't have to leave when the movie was over. You could just see it over and over again for 10 cents. And I never would go home. Mother would always have to come and get me. Here, I'd see this flashlight coming down the aisle. Mother would have to come. She always knew where I was, you know.
Would you get mad at you?
But a little bit. We had Flash Gordon on Saturdays in black and white, you know, and here'd come the spaceship and the... Have you ever seen any old Flash Gordon movies?
No, not the movies.
And it'd end, and you'd have to come back the next Saturday to see what was coming
Oh,
next.
that's cool.
Yeah, and it was just great. It was a great time. That, you know, that was before the war started or anything, you know. But I love movies. I can see why you love movies. I still love movies. Oh, you know, Clark Gable, Cary Grant, James Stewart, Tyrone Power. Oh yeah. They don't have actors like that anymore. You know, then everything was left up to your imagination. There was, you know, it was just clean, you know, stuff like that. Gone with the Wind is one of my... Charlie cut trees all day to take me. I was, let's see, he was 17, I was 14. The movie was 75 cents, and he topped trees and earned enough to take $1.50 to take us both to that movie. And my mother made me wear this big hat and this, I'm telling you. But
Right when it came out?
Right when it came out in Provo.
Gone with the Wind.
Gone with the Wind. Even today I love it.
I don't know if I've ever seen it all the way through.
Oh, well, you might be bored with it now, but I still can just see Clark Gable down at the bottom of that stairway. And you know, the first time they ever swore in a movie was in Gone with the Wind, when he said, "Frankly, I don't give a damn." And everybody went, "Oh!" You know. And I love all the musicals, you know that. You know, I just...
Yeah, Singing in the Rain.
Yeah, Singing in the Rain is one of my very favorites. It was so fun in movies then, Michael, because after the movie they had contests on the stage. And this one time, maybe I told you about this, I was really good at spelling, and they had the spelling bee. And they wanted people to come up, and all the kids were with me. "Send Marilyn up! Send Marilyn up!" So I went up there and I won $4 spelling Massachusetts. It's the only thing the only thing I ever won was that, you know.
Can you spell it now?
Massachussetts, I think.
Did you ever gather around the radio with your family or alone and listen to old radio shows?
I listened to them all the time, but my mother and dad didn't.
Like,
My grandpa loved Amos and Andy. He never missed, you've heard of Amos and Andy. He never missed Amos and Andy. But I can't remember Mother and Dad, you know, whether they did or not. I can't remember.
What were some of your favorite old radio shows? Yours?
Jack Armstrong, The All-American Boy, and Little Orphan Annie, and then you'd send for these rings, you know, with messages in them, and oh, it was so much fun.
Did you ever do that?
Oh, a lot. And then you'd decode the messages, and
What was that from?
it was from Jack Armstrong mostly, yeah. He was the one that did that the most.
Was he like a superhero or something?
Oh, Jack Armstrong? Of course. An Orphan Annie?
I've never even heard of Jack Armstrong.
Haven't you? He always advertised Wheaties.
What about...
You're missing the best times, Michael.
I believe you.
You really are.
I long to be there.
That should have been your time, because you would have absolutely loved it. I loved it so much that I would do my homework laying on my stomach in front of the radio. You know, I just had that radio on constantly with music. And you know, the reason I was good at shorthand was because I did it until 2 o'clock in the morning. I just practiced, and I'd listen to my, you know, and Mother couldn't get me to go to bed. I just couldn't, I was just fascinated by it, you know.
Because of the radio.
Well, but I loved the music, I loved the shorthand, you know. TV started, I don't know when it was invented, but after World War II is when it started. It was lousy. All you could get was wrestling, and it was snowy, and it was terrible. And then it got a little better, and Milton Berle was probably the first one was on there, and Bob Hope, you know, and they were always in black, but they were live, and it was just wonderful.
So what was it like to have radio all this time, and suddenly you can watch the person?
Yeah, it was just something we never thought would happen. You know, they had this War of the Worlds, that what's his name, and in this film, in this thing, they had this, and also in the spaceship thing, they had the TV thing with pictures on it, and we thought, oh, that'll never happen, you know, but after World War II is when they started out with television, you know, and we just couldn't believe it. I mean, we had to go to a movie to see the news or to see. Yeah, I mean, you could get the news on the radio, but they showed the news every time. First you'd see the news, and then you'd have a cartoon, and then you'd have your movie. We had no TV. Mom and Dad, none of us got TVs for a while. You know, if some people did, we'd go watch it at their place, you know, but it wasn't the most important thing, and we still went to the movies and stuff. I'm sorry TV ever came. No, I'm not.
I can't believe you are saying that.
No, I'm glad for my movies, yeah.
Well, and your news,
I shouldn't say that because I love TV.
your news shows.
I love TV.
What was your first job?
My
Job you ever had?
Woolworths, working down in the supplies and stuff. I was 16 when I worked in Woolworths. And that's when I started selling. Then I was still working there when I was selling bonds, you know, for the war and stuff like that. And I had long hair, Michael, and it was kind of like a peekaboo. My hair was down to here, and the soldiers and sailors, you know, would come for leave, and they'd come to my booth, and I think they thought I was wild because of the way but I wasn't. But.
And they'd come to your booth
and really flirt with me and really, you know. But, you know, I had Charlie on my mind.
Charlie?
I worked at Hill Field. I didn't tell you that. Did you know I worked at Hill Field?
Oh.
Mayvon and Radine and I and Kathy all went to Hill Field and worked after high school. And I worked for a first lieutenant. I was his secretary. And I remember I got invited to the officers club for a dance, and I said, I can't go, I'm engaged. I was so true blue, Michael, that it was sickening. I don't know why, but I think some people thought I was just looking at my big boobs and everything. I think they thought I was wild, and so they all got Dale to take me out. There was Burnell Boswell, Del Cox, a couple of others, and they said, take her out and see, you know, if she's wild or, you know, they hadn't heard anything or anything. So he took, and he was, at that time, you didn't get a driver's license till you were 18, but he had a little car that he drove around that he didn't have a license, but he came to get me in the car. But he took me home, and he said, is it okay if I kiss you goodnight? And I said, I guess it's okay. And boy, from that time on, that whole gang of boys just guarded me, protected me. Anybody ever said anything about me, you know, he kissed me goodnight, but that was, you know, it was. Well, there's many years, 15 years between Judy and I, 11 years between Phil and I.
Kind of like me and Randy.
We're closer now. Judy and I were closer. Phil, I wasn't, you know, around him a lot, except I used to type all of his work in school and stuff for him before he went on his mission, you know, and stuff. I used to put up raspberries, and he loved my raspberries. So I'd give him a couple of bottles of that. But Phil never talked much until he got home from his mission. Then he never shut up. He's never shut up since.
What do you mean?
Oh, he never hardly ever talked. And I remember when he was younger, about 11 years difference. I was in high school, and he was probably 7 or 8, and he used to drive me crazy at the dinner table. And I'd say, because he'd act silly, you know, and I'd say, if he doesn't quit that, I'm leaving this table. I remember he really got on my nerves. But when Judy was born, Phil crawled into a hole, and because she just was a beautiful little girl, and he had been the center of attraction, you know, and I had to rock both of them underneath their crib to bed to sleep.
That was your job?
That was what I had to do to get them to go to sleep.
Oh.
I moved to Salt Lake. I never would have met your father if I hadn't have done that. And I hadn't been to the temple, and they wouldn't let you go then without your spouse. The first thing I wanted to know, I had to wait a year. And then I went to the temple, I walked across the street to the Relief Society building. I've told you this story.
Tell it again.
Okay, and we walked across the street to the Relief Society building, and your dad was in there with my Aunt Jo. You had to get your garments there at the time. And she introduced me to him, and I thought he was really nice. I thought he was married. I didn't pay any attention to him. And I got home and she called me and she said, Marilyn, this man is a widower. His wife died 7 months ago. He wants to take you out. And she didn't tell me how old he was or anything. And so she said he's going to call you. So he called me that night, he called me maybe a week later. And I had 3 dates the night he called. He wanted to take me out. And I said, oh, I'm really busy tonight. And he said, well, I'm going out of town. I'll call you as soon as I get back. And he came back and he called me and took me up to Maxfield Lodge, scared the heck out of me. His driving, you know, stopped at Morris's cabin, broke into it. I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know. Only thing I know about this guy is what my aunt's telling me, that he's a great guy. I've known him for years, she said. Don't let him get away from you. And I'm sitting there on this swing thing on the porch, and he's breaking into Morris's cabin, you know, and God, you can see your dad doing this, you know. We had our steaks outside. I guess we put them on a thing, you know, and here come this couple. And, oh, he said, you know, they got married, they're coming here for their honeymoon. I said, why didn't you tell me? He said, oh, they won't care. Boy, you should have seen the look on their face when they saw us there.
Oh, man.
But that's
And
your
you
dad.
stayed?
Yes. Well, we didn't stay all night, of course. We were never intended to do that. We left, you know, so. But they went right up to bed, you know. Well, the first impression was in Aunt Jo's office. I thought he was really nice looking. You know, and then when he came to get me, I looked at him and I thought this guy was better looking than this. And his walk, you know how Dad walked? That really, you know, but I just got over that totally. And I remember we were walking around the block a lot. We walked a lot, Wilbur and I said, I remember him saying, do you feel comfortable around me? Because evidently some people didn't, because he's so quiet. And you know how I loved quiet? One of the first things that attracted him to me, was that he was quiet. I just loved it, and I loved it our whole marriage. And he wasn't that quiet when we were alone. But you don't even know your dad.
Help me get to know him.
I remember the first time he met my mother. My mother did not want me to marry Wilbur. You know, she thought he was too old for me, you know, and Mother, you know, I wasn't about to listen to her anymore. But I remember when I took him up to meet Mother, and you know, your dad has this dry sense of humor, and Mother was in she had on this kimono and stuff, and she said to him, oh, if I'd have known you're coming, I would have changed I would have put my clothes on. He says, what's the matter, your clothes stuck to you? You know. And I don't know if Mother, you know, he never made a fuss over Mother, and you had to make a fuss over Mother, or she didn't, you know, what's the matter, your clothes? And at the time I thought, gee, that was kind of rude, but it was just Wilbur, your clothes stuck to you? But when I found out how old your father was, 14 years difference, I told you what I said. He asked me to marry him after a week, Michael. And I said, look, you're too old for me. I don't love you because I don't know you. And he said, but you will. and I gave several reasons, and then he said, now wait a minute, let me tell you why you should marry me. We both love the Lord. Have I ever told you this? Both love the Lord. Richard needs a mother, your kids need a father, and I want children. And now ordinarily, Michael, I would say, hey, I'm not about to do this. I don't even know this guy very much. But the Spirit just said, pushed me. I didn't want to go, but he pushed me, and I've never been sorry 1 minute. And I had never been treated like that. We needed air conditioning in that apartment. Your dad came up and saw it was hot the next day, and I'd only known him a couple of weeks. Here he comes with a cooler, swamp cooler, and puts in my window. Vicki needed to get her driver's license. He got a car, took her up to get her driver's license. I mean, I had never been treated like that. He took me to the temple in Logan and handed me my temple clothing. And I just stood there and cried. Nobody had ever. And I went back to work at the gas company and I said, should I keep this stuff? And Aunt Marion thought that I was just taking him for, you know, and she said, she's just after your money. I never even thought of money. And he said, that's okay, Marion, when I marry her, I'll get it back. He was so positive, Michael, there was no doubt in his mind that he was going to marry me. You know, he took me golfing. And instead of going from the beginning, we climbed over the fence at the University of Utah, and he said, we can do this because my brother Morris has a membership here. We didn't pay. We just played from the middle. And, you know, I thought that was kind of weird. You know, I was playing golf at that time. You know, that's the last time we ever played golf together. But it was, you know, after I married him, I would see that's just Wilbur, you know. That
was one of your dates?
That was after I'd known him just not even a week. I think it was right after he took me up to Maxfield Lodge. It's so weird. Well, he was there every day, every night. He came to the door and he had some zucchini squash and some eggs, and he said, I'm going to fix you the best meal you ever tasted. And I had never had zucchini and eggs. And oh, I loved them. I thought they were just, you know. Vicki had her own bedroom. The boys shared the bedroom, and I had to hide a bed in the living room. And this one night, your dad came knocking at the door, and I was in bed. And I said, oh, I'm in bed. And he said, well, that's okay. I'll just lay to the side of you on the couch, and I'll watch television with you. The bed was pulled out. And I don't know why I let him, you know. So he came in and laid to the side of me, and we watched television.
Did he try to hold your hand, put his arm?
No, we didn't do that. And finally one day I said to him, for a long time, and finally one day I said to him, are you afraid I'm going to break or something? Boy, that's all it took. He was a kisser. Well, you know, in his journal it says good neck and every girl he took out, but Michael, I've never been kissed like that before. But he never tried anything with me. He never...
He really was a good kisser.
Oh. He had hidden talents, let me tell you.
You're awesome. You are so good.
I mean, I didn't find out most of the hidden talents until I married him, but I only knew him 6 weeks when I married him, so. And he just absolutely swept me right off my feet. After I married him, it wasn't a month before I just couldn't live without him. He couldn't have got rid of me if he tried. You know, he was just everything I wanted, Michael, and I didn't ever notice the 14 years difference. And you know, my kids loved Wilbur because he was so good to me, my older kids. So when you were born, I was 36, and I was 38 when David was born. I'm telling you, nobody could have told me years before that I would end up with, I mean, you don't, being 35, you don't, I would have said, I'm not, if that's all you want to marry me for. The Holy Ghost would... I was listening. I was really listening. When I married Wilbur, the windows of heaven opened up for me. I got him, you know. I'll never know why I was that lucky. It was just like stepping into heaven. I think we went up to the cabin for our honeymoon. That's a little personal.
Well, you don't have to get into detail.
Except that, you know, we played all night long. We played Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald music. You know, that was some of my favorite music, and his too. And we played that. We just had a great time. But, you know, he hadn't had sex for so long.
Neither had you.
Well, no, but then he got an infection or something. I don't know what happened, but he had to go to the doctor, and he went down from the cabin because he was worried about himself. He came back with a prescription, and he handed it to me, and it said no sex for 3 days. That was so funny. That was so funny. Went to New Orleans and stayed with a millionaire named Sam Rosselli. We walked up and down the Bourbon Street. We went in and listened to Pete Fountain play his clarinet is what he plays. I'll never forget that, Bourbon Street, you know. And it was just a different life for me, Michael. You know, we went in his old Nash Rambler and we slept in the back of the car, the Rambler, and I thought it was a ball. Now, if it had been my mother, she would have just raised all kinds of Cain, but we just had a ball, you know. It was just, I thought it was just wonderful. But I'm really easy to get along with, you know. I really am. We had a waltzing contest, and Wilbur and I won. He's a really good waltzer. They were just having a contest, and all of us went out in the middle of the floor and danced, and they'd come and touch you when you were out, and we were left last.
Really?
And I was a good dancer. I don't think I could even dance nowadays. I loved to dance. Stephen was having problems with his problem, and so I was taking him to a psychologist, and she was worried about me too, because for some reason or other she wanted to talk to me alone too, and all this kind of stuff, and finally told me that I didn't vent my feelings enough, and that I should show how I felt more. And I got thinking about that. Maybe I didn't, you know. And I got home that night, and I had just put a clean pair of pajamas on David the night before, and I put another clean pair on him that night. Wilbur said, "You just put clean pajamas on him last night. You have to." And I threw the pajamas. I just took off out the door. I think Wilbur sat there with his mouth open. I don't know, but anyway, and I went to a drive-in movie, and the movie was Alfie. You heard of the movie Alfie? It was a rotten show. He was in and out of bed with everybody, if you remember right. And I got home about 12, and I knocked on that back door up there, and he didn't come to the door. And so I thought, well, and the door was locked. You know, he didn't hear me, I guess. So that really made me mad that he didn't come to the door. So I got in my car and rode around till 1 o'clock, came back and finally woke him up, and he said, "Well, hello, sweetheart. Did you have a good time?" I wanted to kill him. You know, and then the next day I said, "Weren't you even worried about where I was?" And he said, "No, I knew I could trust you."
That's a great.
I wasn't as affectionate, and that was hard for Wilbur. I tried to explain that because I was very affectionate, Michael.
So before the hysterectomy, you were?
I was very affectionate. In fact, sometimes he had a headache.
That's great.
I think I just was more than he could handle.
See, you don't just answer questions. You have such a great personality.
No, but really, after I had my hysterectomy, I just felt a little different, you know, and it was nothing to do with him, and I tried to explain that to him. I'm a backseat driver, and he drove terribly.
I remember one day, he's like,
I remember you kids saying,
"Oh,
"You're
for
not..."
hell's sakes."
No, he said that.
Yeah.
He says, "Oh my hell." But I remember you kids saying, "Are you and Dad going to get a divorce?" You and David sitting in the back seat.
Really?
Yeah, because I was terrible. It was my fault. So finally he just let me drive, or else he'd put me in the back. And I didn't mind that because I knew how I was.
So you didn't like yell, scream at each other?
Oh, never. Your dad never raised his voice at me. That's the most he ever did, is when he said, "Oh my hell." And like I told you, when he was very sick and couldn't do anything, and when he came up to me and put his arms around me and he said, "I just touch you," and I tingled from my head clear down to my toes. And that was probably about a couple of months before he died. You know, and I knew he didn't say that to get me in the sack, because he couldn't do that, you know, and he just, that was the most spiritual time of my life, Michael, is when he was sick. And he slept in. We slept together for a long time, and then he got so he'd have diarrhea. So I got that hospital bed, you know, and then I put it back here, and then the bed was over here, and one day he said to me, "You're so far away," and so I moved the bed over close to him, and then he was happy. I moved it right by the side of the. He said, "I can't stand having you that far away," and I remember before he quit sleeping with me, we laid in bed, and I said, "Wilbur, I can't live without you," because we knew he was going to die, and we both just sobbed and cried. You know, I just didn't know if I could make it without him, you know. One Sunday morning, you know, he was in so much pain, and I just said a prayer. I didn't know what to do, you know, and you know Mel Ward that was in our stake? He knocked on the door, and Dad was in the High Council at the time. And I opened that door and I said, "Oh my gosh, you're an answer to a prayer. Will you give Wilbur a blessing?" And he came in and gave Wilbur a blessing, and Wilbur just settled right down. Things happened that just were, I wouldn't leave his side, you know. I just sat right there by him most of the time. And then the one time I leave him to go get some lunch in that where he was, and he leaves me. You know, that 9 months was just the most spiritual. We were like one. I mean, we were always really close, but it was just. But you know what, Mike? I bathed, I showered him. When I think of, and I was always afraid of sick people. And when I think of what I had to do when he was sick, and I really felt privileged to be able to do it for him, because he had done so much for me, and he wouldn't let me do anything for him when he was well. And I didn't want him to be sick, but it was just knowing that you know, at least I could pay back a little bit, you know.
Those are some really.
I love Mike. I can't tell you the feeling I have for your dad, you know, and it's. Oh, and on the trips, he was so cute with me, you know. I remember we went to that film on our church history tour, and we went into some film, and he lost me. And he's clear down here, and I'm up here. And he's down there not caring, and he hollers, "Mother, Mother, where are you?"
What was this?
So the whole busload started calling me Mother. This was way back when we took our church history tours. I mean, you know, I think he loved me a lot. I really do. He just, I just idolized him, you know. In fact, sometimes I'd say, "I think it's one-sided. I love you a lot more than you do me." Oh, no, you know. Or if I'd ever say, "You know, you're such a much better person than I am," and he'd say, "Marilyn, you're a much better person than I am." Because I'm not a scriptorian or anything like that, you know.
What does that have to do with anything?
But I just wouldn't give up that 34 years. That was the shortest 34 years I ever, you know, it just went so fast because we had such a good time. We went in the camper once to, we were going, Jackie was with us. Wilbur says, "Let's take a blanket and go down by we were by some water. Let's take a blanket and go down by the water." And, oh, that was the most romantic moment. You know, everybody was asleep, but the moon was shining, and I don't know who saw us out there, but I had some great times with your dad. Yeah, won the championship.
Start.
Well, I'm just had Suzanne, Sally's sister, was best pitch I have ever seen in softball, and Sally was catch, and Jill, of course, was wonderful. They were all just really good. So we won the championship, and I think we even went farther. I think we just plain won the championship clear up to the. You know, it's been so long ago, but I remember loving that. It was just, you know, I had so much energy. They loved me. They all called me Aunt Marilyn to this day. It was always either in the primary or, you know, I taught in the young women's a lot. I taught the Laurels, and I taught the Maya Maids, and I taught the Beehives, and then they made me president of the. I've never been in the presidency of the Relief Society, and I'm sure glad.
Why?
Because I think that'd be hard. That is not my area. It's just not my area. But I also, before I went to Philadelphia, you know, I was a Relief Society teacher. I taught the human relations. They don't have this class anymore, but taught the human relations, and I loved that. I'd shake like crazy when I did it, but gee, that was one of my favorite things. You know, I really can't remember. I know that one day I was doing the dishes, and I had this really strong feeling that I should go out by the swimming pool, and David was hanging in the deep like this and almost ready to fall in. He was 3 years old, and I remember pulling him out of the street.
Yeah, tell that story.
I was sitting on the front porch, that big front porch, and he was on his little tricycle going down Marion and Virgil's, and you know, it goes down, and he started going down. I could see this car coming, and I jumped over that railing. I'll never know how I did that, and grabbed him just in time. Well, we dressed up like an old man and an old woman and went around to our relatives. I remember we went to Morris's and just walked in, didn't knock or anything. We just walked in, and Morris was laying on the couch in just his garments. You know, they didn't know who we were, and we just sat in the chair and didn't say anything. You know, it's so funny to watch people. We told them who we were, but oh my gosh, they were scared to death. Went over to Mother's. She was petrified.
Well, I can see Dad doing that, but I can't see you being able to hold your tongue.
I did, though.
Was it hard for you?
Very.
So you just walked in.
We went on to the neighbors, and
just walk in people's houses.
just walked right in. If the door was open, you know, unlocked, we'd walk right in. That first year we did that, though, we went over to Virgil and Marion's. That was before Virgil got mad at us, and the shock on people's faces, you know.
You just sat there and not said a word there?
Not said a word until we were ready to go, and then we told them who we were. We didn't tell them all who we were, though. I think some figured it out because Wilbur was so tall and I was so short. I can't remember who figured it out, but...
Okay. So if you're sitting there not saying a word, would they talk to you, or would you talk?
No, they'd just talk to each other. Who is that? Are you sure they're okay? Are they? I mean, it's just funny to watch them, you know? I was a good secretary. I would be a good processor for you if I was younger. I couldn't do it now, but let me tell you, I'm not bragging. I was good.
What made you good?
Huh?
What made you good? What was good about you?
I was fast. I was efficient. I was fast. I was pleasant. I don't know. Everybody I worked for seemed to say, you know, you'll never have any problem getting a job. You know.
Good.
Because I told you I worked half a day in my senior year as a secretary, and that was so good because then when Charlie and I separated, I had a job. You know, I made more because I could take shorthand. I wish I'd learned to sew, Michael. I hated sewing. It's okay. In the next world, I'm going to learn to sew. I didn't even think that was important at the time. And now I watch Ann. Ann makes her grandkids' wedding dresses. And I think, oh, how stupid I am. I can't do any of that. I hate to sew. I'd sew Vicky's dresses when she was little, and they'd come apart. And I did make shirts for Randy and Stephen and Wilbur and Charlie for 4th of July once. They were all red, white, and blue, and I did a pretty darn good job on that. But I hated it because I had to keep unpicking it, putting it back, and so that was not my thing.